Hi, everyone, and welcome to SF Doc Fest 2023. I'm Gigi Haycock, one of the programmers at the festival, and I have the pleasure of welcoming the director, writer, and producer of Color of Ink, The Color of Ink. And joining us a little bit later joining me a little bit later, Jason Logan, who is the main subject of the film. So let's start out with Brian. Thank you so much for coming and telling us about your film. Really appreciate it. And it was a visually remarkable film to me. And I learned so much. The history and just it's pretty incredible. And the editing is fantastic. So how did it begin? Maybe what was the origins?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and thanks for programming the film. It's a thrill to be showing it to people in San Francisco and beyond, I guess. The film evolved and was created as organically as the ink through total happenstance. I've known Jason Logan, the ink maker, for at least 20 years. He and I both worked at Maclean's, which was Canada's weekly news magazine. I was a film critic, entertainment writer. Jason came in at a certain point long after I joined and sort of took over the art department. So I knew him casually like that, sort of enviously. I always wanted really to work in the art department. And then years later, after we both left the magazine, we went down our respective rabbit holes. I became a filmmaker kind of by accident, just by discovering the video point and shoot function on a point and shoot camera. And like everybody else in the DIY revolution, started, shooting and editing on an iMac. Jason started making his own ink. And he left, he continued to work in print in various places, but he started making ink. So we both were kind of refugees of print, mainstream media. And we met again when I was shooting my previous documentary feature, which was about a dead Canadian poet, legendary in Canada, called Al Purdy. Mm-hmm. I was interviewing Margaret Atwood, and she said, well, did you know that the statue of Al Purdy in Toronto's Queen's Park has a Twitter feed? And I did not know that. Later that day, I ran into Jason at a poetry prize gala, and Jason said, oh, you got to introduce me to Margaret Atwood. And I hadn't seen him in ages. He said, well, that's weird. I was just talking to her. And he said, I got to give her something. And then he blurted out, I'm the voice of the statue of Al Purdy Twitter feed. And, this was anonymous, this Twitter feed. And Atwood had been following it for ages. And I think he blurted that out because he thought that would be his entree to Margaret Atwood. Well, inevitably, Jason's tweets ended up in my film, and we went so far as to shoot him in Queen's Park in Toronto around the statue. And the statue is just next to a black walnut tree, which is the first source of his very first ink. So we went so far as to film him collecting black walnuts and making black walnut ink in his kitchen. And that footage, shot almost 10 years ago, some of that footage is actually in The Color of Ink. So long story short, I was making this film before I even realized it. After we cut all that footage from the film pretty well. And Jason said, could you cut me a reel? So I cut him a reel, and then, I'm doing something. Can you shoot this? So I shot this. And the eureka moment came when I put a close-up lens on an ink test, which the living ink sort of just, and it was like an undiscovered cosmos. And I thought, nobody's seen this. I want to see it on the big screen. Yeah. Now, I know people who are watching this won't be seeing it on the big screen, but frankly, that was the only reason I made the film, was to see this secret life of ink on the big screen. And then all the rest of the film, the sort of structure of the film, the fact that it became a bit of a history of ink, a story of color, and a bit of a personal story about Jason and some of the artists that, the constellation of artists around him. All of that kind of developed as we plotted the film out and mapped what it could and should be. And there were so many, unlike the previous film I made, which was basically you follow the story and that's the film. This could have been anything we wanted it to be, which is scary what you wish for, because it's, it could be the story of ink. Was it going to be all about color? Was it going to be a portrait of an artist? So we kind of split the difference and ended up with what we ended up with.
Yeah. The people are amazing in this film too. So was that organic as well, or did Jason already know some of these
It was a bit
other
of
ink
both.
makers?
It was a bit of both. Some of the people in the film, like the cartoonist Liana Fink, a number of the people were people that Jason, Heidi Gustafsson, he had close relationships with these people, Marta Abbott in Rome. And there were some that we kind of recruited. I had to get financing after years of writing treatments. Somebody said, well, you got to cut a sizzle reel. You got to cut a proof of concept trailer. And how do you do that? Well, just get a bunch of clips off the internet. So I ripped a bunch of clips off the internet, and I just looked for, well, calligraphers, the most famous Japanese calligrapher, Koji Kakunuma. Oh, okay. So he was in, there was footage of him in the proof of concept reel. There was footage of Soraya Saeed in the proof of concept reel. So it's amazing how you'd never script a documentary or even cast it until you had financing normally. But in order to sell it, you've got to kind of imagine it. And so through that process, I came to, begin the casting process. And eventually the people that we, like Rox, the tattoo artist, I found her on the internet. And eventually we, you build it and they will come.
Yeah. Wow. And then did I see the Canadian Documentary Film Board also? You got those kind of people on board with you?
The National Film Board, the National Film Board of Canada, yeah. They came on board, which was terrific because they do have deep pockets. And this film was shot in 7 countries, and that's not cheap, no matter how economical you are. And they also have a great distribution system in Canada. I mean, our film, played in 7 cities across the country in theaters, and they were very helpful. It was great to have to work for an organization where the sole goal is really cultural and artistic. It's so different from the private sector, and with them, and also with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which licensed it for broadcast. In Canada, you patch together, like anywhere, I guess, funding from any independent film from all kinds of a matrix of sources, and that's how it worked. I was kind of amazed that we got a healthy budget to tell a story of ink, because it's such a niche thing. But the odd thing is that it touches everybody's lives in a way,
Well, the natural world. You could just feel that, and then the alchemy that comes out of it, was remarkable. And every time a drop went on a paper, and it just spread out into this, you don't know what it's going to be. It's kind of, that's where the, organic part of that is as well,
Well, in editing it and even in shooting it, I tried to go against the grain of conventional documentary, try to avoid exposition. As little as necessary, even though we do have a history of ink, that's sort of threaded through the film. No talking heads. There were heads that talked, but they would usually be in the process of doing something or turned into voiceover. I didn't want to explain so much as reveal. I wanted people sometimes to be seeing something without knowing what it was. You sort of want that what the F moment, it's a bit like a comedy has to have a certain number of laughs. And I feel this kind of documentary has to have a certain number of reveals where people just that hopefully take people's breath away. That was the goal. And so awe and wonder. I remember the first time I went to the film board and the producer said, well, what do you want to tell the world with this film? I said, nothing really. I want to provide sort of an unforgettable experience. I want to change people's lives, but on a kind of, not on the level that, an advocacy documentary or a political documentary would do so. Not to say that there aren't environmental concerns and, undercurrents of, like what our relationship to nature, open our eyes, change your life by just going for a walk and looking at something, taking a second look at something. And in some sense, the film isn't even about ink, in the sense that even for Jason, who's a dedicated ink maker, the ink is a conduit of sorts. It's like a two-way radio. It doesn't just transmit a message from the person who's using it. It reflects the the place it comes from. It reflects the memory of the place that it comes from. And so the film became a bit metaphysical in a sense. And I've always enjoyed the notion of a metaphysical documentary where you aren't just empirically representing things, but you're seeing some kind of transformation, mysterious transformation happen before your eyes. And I think there was a bit of that going on, certainly. We didn't know where the film was going. It was the most immaculately planned and charted out and storyboarded thing I've ever done in my life. But in the end, you know, when Yuri Shimojo, when Koji Kakenuma says, what do you want me to draw? And we said, well, he gave us a few options. We settled on the word oneness. And then I said, well, Koji, what is the word oneness? Like the actual ideogram for it. He said, it's just a straight line. My heart just dropped. I said, what do you mean? It's just a line? Well, of course, Koji had a different idea of a straight line than most people. And then Yuri Shimojo, another Japanese artist, when we sort of cast her and she was doing the unbroken line, which in the end took her, months. Koji's line took him less than a minute in actual execution. But it never occurred to me till we were editing that, wait a minute, we've got two Japanese artists both drawing lines, and that the line is kind of the fundamental, grammar of ink. It's the basic form that ink takes for most people in terms of writing. And I just thought, well, that's interesting. We didn't put that there.
Right. But that's the oneness in a way,
That is the oneness, yeah.
And it's Liana, right? So she also did that one page, she said, that took her
the Japanese artist was Yuri Shimojo. Liana Fink is she did she's the New Yorker cartoonist.
Right. In her book, though, she said there was that one page where she just it was like, it took so long to have to make that.
It was just sort of lines and lines and lines, kind of cross-hatching of lines.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even an image. It was just, ink on the page. And she said she wanted to sort of reflect the nature of women's work, and that sort of the repetitive, ritualized work like that doesn't have to, that can be art too. It's not just craft.
Yeah. And I saw, in that, a little bit of texture that came out of how she was repetitively drawing and cross-hatching and everything. I don't know. Yeah. I found that there was dimension there.
I love to watch on film. I love to watch artists paint and draw and write or whatever. I just find the action of the brush or the pen on the page, even if they know kind of what they're doing, there's an improvisational nature to it. It's fundamental to it, that you feel you're watching something invent itself in real time. And I found that Jason, as an ink maker and a forager of natural ingredients, when we were with him on location or when we were with him in his studio, it was like an actor improvising. He was always kind of inventing the moment, looking for, never quite sure what he was looking for, just waiting for the moment to reveal itself. And that's a very tangible and palpable thing. And it's kind of what the film is about, really, I think.
And it's somewhat hard to do if you don't know what's next, and I think that as human beings, sometimes we're always planning, we're always looking forward to making sure, and then letting this just, kind of create itself is, it takes trust, I think.
Well, it's funny, the process of ink making, at a certain point, Jason and I sort of figured, well, ink making and filmmaking, kind of the same, you go out and you forage all this material, and then you refine it and distill it, you mix it, it's kind of a narrowing of options until you come up with something that represents just sort of a real concentrate of everything that goes into it. And I think one of the things that distinguishes ink from other art materials is its intensity, and also its transparency. In some cases, it can be opaque, but it also seems to have a kind of translucent quality. which is true, I guess, of watercolors and so on. I mean, I shouldn't. I'm the last person to talk about the subject of the film. You know, Jason is the guy to do
Yeah,
that.
great.
He's the authority.
You just make the films.
I just, yeah. I mean, a lot of, you know, we collaborated all the way through in you know, voiceover and everything else, and in planning. But we wanted it to be very clear that I thought it would be unfair to Jason if he was sort of drafted into being a filmmaker, because we wanted him. He never saw the film, any of it really, until it was, you know, at the level of fine cut, you know. So I felt it was important that a feedback loop not start where he's sort of second guessing what he's doing because of what he's seen.
Right.
And
Oh, that's, yeah.
it's partly just my years as a journalist, you know, that division that, you know, you don't show the subject, the story. In fact, in journalism, you never show the subject of the story until it's until it's in print, and even the fact checking is done in a way that they don't exactly know what is in it. But in this case, it's interesting. This is a thing that's happened with documentaries, and I think it's partly due to the experience with making documentaries about Indigenous subjects. That the National Film Board now has a policy that the subject of a film has to see it in time to have some influence over the final product if there are issues. So so we did that, and that was useful as well.
Wow.
Is Jason here yet?
Truly incredible.
Is
No,
Jason
he hasn't popped
I'm
on
sure.
yet.
I'm sure he will soon.
Okay.
Hopefully, he will join us soon.
Was
Otherwise, you're stuck
was
with
the
me.
first? Yeah, well, that's fine. That's good. Was the premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival? Was that the premiere of this film? Because I
Yeah,
did
that
notice that
was.
it played.
That it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival, which is great. I mean, you want your film ideally to play at you know, one of the top, you know, half dozen
Absolutely.
international world film festivals. And I mean, at the same time, it's a mixed blessing. You're fighting for attention with Hollywood stars and, you know, all kinds of other things. But no, it was great for the film. It got it out there. And I guess the amazing thing that happens when you know, I've written all my life as a, you know, journalist and author and so on. And you can't really be proud of your own writing because it's just you. But when you make a film and you finally see it, and even just the first time you see it in a rough cut up on a big movie screen, you think it's like a building. You look at it and maybe you're the architect, but you didn't create it. I mean, all these other incredibly talented artists created it with you. And it's possible to take real pride in it without narcissism. You know, it's a very different kind of process, filmmaking than writing, which even though there's a lot of writing and filmmaking, in particular producing. I mean, producing is basically pitching a lot of the time. You know, the number of times you
Getting
reformulate.
the money and stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, or all the way through. And you know, people say, "Are you going to make another film?" And are you going to contact Jason, see if he's on deck?
Yeah, I was just looking to see if anything just came through for me that he's having maybe trouble getting on. Um, I don't see
Well,
it.
we'll pass
I
the
can,
ball over to him if and when he comes.
okay.
The the other thing is that it's interesting to see what people make of the film. I wasn't setting out to make an inspirational film, but the number of people who come out of it saying that they saw the world differently and they were inspired to kind of do something and change, that's kind of amazed me. That amazed me because it's as if they were just responding to what was there, not with they weren't, of course, they weren't responding to what the film was telling them to think or do or anything. It was just we took them into a world, and it's something that I think amazed them enough that they came out kind of tingling with some sort of sense of possibility. And you know, you can't really design a film to do that. I don't think. You know, if you get
Well,
that.
I have to say that I felt that way. I was like, oh, I need to get out more. You know what I mean? Like there's so much that I'm not doing in a way. And because I love all of the colors and nature and all that. I live in Colorado now.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, we've got plenty of places to explore and do those things. So
You're
I was
not
kind of like,
kidding.
I gotta,
Colorado, yikes.
yeah.
I should say that for our San Francisco viewers here, that they would know if they've seen the film that that we had a wonderful shoot in San Francisco at the Albany Bulb, which is a landfill that juts out into the harbor and into the bay, rather, San Francisco Bay. And I mean, one thing Jason does, a lot of his work is very solitary. He's out there in the field foraging by himself. He's making ink alone, unless there's a camera crew with him. But a big part of what he does also is, since he's kind of launched this vocation as an ink maker, is that he does workshops and seminars and ink making excursions. In fact, what really launched him was he wrote a book called Make Ink. And when he published it out of New York, at the book launch, there was a New Yorker writer who said, well, is there an event or something I can write about for Talk of the Town? Because we need an event. So he said, okay, who wants to join an ink making forage through Central Park tomorrow? And he got some volunteers. And then that group forage became, a New Yorker article, which kind of put him on the map. And that San Francisco group forage that is in the film, we wanted to include one example of him working with other people. He also loves working with kids because they just are instant ink makers. So that was a treat. And Wendy McNaughton, who is a famous illustrator with the New York Times, lives in San Francisco, and she was part of that forage. We also shot some wonderful other stuff with her, but when you spend 2 years shooting a film, which we did because of the pandemic, given our production schedule was so stretched, you just kept finding new material and new subjects, and an awful lot of brilliant stuff ended up on the cutting room floor because you just had to go with whatever served best the story. And so we lost that part of Wendy, but I do feel, a film is the tip of the iceberg, and all the rest of it that you don't see still influences what you see. It's still part of the creation of the film, and we had a lovely time in San Francisco and all up and down the west coast of the USA, which was our last road trip until the pandemic shut us down. And then we had to do remote shoots in Italy and London and so on. And we did that, with crews that we hired, and I directed remotely, which I don't recommend to anybody. But but the interesting thing is that the ink could travel, even though I couldn't and Jason couldn't. So the ink, we always thought of the ink as our silent protagonist, that Jason was just the vehicle, and the ink, the living ink, was kind of the protagonist of the film. And it kind of turned out to be true in ways we hadn't anticipated.
Yeah. That seems to be what that time did for a lot of people, and how to work around getting something done. And I would say that I couldn't tell that it was, done during that time, during when you couldn't travel, because it doesn't appear and come across that way at all.
Yeah, there's one place where he wears a mask, but it could very well be because he's working with magnetite dust.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah, and also we see Koji wearing a mask at one point too. But we decided not to make the pandemic part of the story because it just didn't seem that relevant. But it did become part of the story in the sense that the mail became, part of the story. That Jason loves the mail. He rhapsodizes about, the U.S. Postal Service or the Canadian Postal Service, and how, this is, because it is a great kind of analog vehicle of communication. It sends ink around the world in printed form, and he uses it to send his ink, still uses it to send his inks to artists around the world. And he tends to use the mail as opposed to couriers, which I find nice. And
I wonder what that form is like to fill out what's inside, like when it's black and it has magnesium, I mean, it's they must be used to it maybe, but
They must
You
be,
know,
yeah. I'm just, we're probably going to run out of time. I'm just going to text Jason to see if, because I know he confirmed that he'd be here.
well, here, let
But,
me pause.
well, it looks like the Toronto Ink Company is with us, so I will
Yes,
say my farewell and pass the baton over to Jason Logan. Thanks very much for having me.
yes, it was wonderful, and I really appreciate it. And I have a great day.
You too.
Thanks. Hi, Jason.
Hi, I'm so sorry I'm late there. I'm just having a little, I seem to be an analog person these days.
No, that's fine. I'm Gigi Haycock. I'm one of the programmers.
Jason,
So
nice to meet you.
nice to meet you. I was saying to Brian how wonderfully gorgeous the film is, and it 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 made me want to do more out in the natural world. I mean, definitely from just the get-go, from when you were talking about it and stuff. And I don't quite know where to begin because so much is intertwined in the film, you know, and you're beginning to, you know, with the black walnut in the, you know, hey, ink can come from trees and, you know, things like that. And you're beginning, so it was informational and it was just beautiful. I didn't know this. I mean, I didn't know a lot of the ink stories, really.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, dying and all that stuff too. But let's see. I don't know where to start. Are you doing something right now with a special color or anything?
Right now, I've been working with fruits, actually. I've been using like freeze-dried strawberries and blueberries and mango skins, and I'm trying to see how much, I've got a project for kind of a big, every once in a while, some company or individual calls me and says like, can you make color out of this? And I always just say like, yes, I can, you know, and then I have to deal with my saying yes to it. I just wanted to go back for just a second to your first comment, which was so nice, which is just that I feel like you hit upon the two things that are most important to me. Like one, that, and I know Brian would agree too, just that the film feels like something immersive that just feels beautiful, you know? And I sort of discovered the beauty of ink, you know, very much alone in my own studio, and sort of being able to share that feeling that it's a whole world is like kind of the most thrilling thing about this film. And then the maybe shared with that as a most thrilling thing about the film is just that people kind of come out of the film wanting to like do something, you know, like wanting to work with their hands. Or I've had a lot of people come up to me and sort of like almost like shake me by the shoulders and say like, I really want to make ink, you know, and then they're like, I don't even know why I want to make ink, but I want to make some ink, you know, like, so that's been kind of an amazing thing about sharing, you know, sharing the community that I work with, sharing the history, sharing my own practice in a way that's a bit bigger than just sort of hidden away in my studio. So that opening that up a little bit to the world is really thrilling to me.
Yeah,
it's also
and I like.
sorry. Just to go back to the fruit inks, it's also been really fun to be like, how can I make an ink like smell like a strawberry as well as be made out of a strawberry, you know?
Now you're having to do scents as well as ink. Interesting, you know, but that's all part of the nature. I'm just trying to look at some of the notes that I was taking here. You know, saying it's kind of what you're saying is working with and for nature, where it's alive, a fugitive, and on the run. You talk about that in the film. And I felt like I could see what that was like every time, you know, an ink was put on a paper, you know, and it became active, and it became like a process, and a, you know, and one that you maybe don't know, you know, what it's going to look like, you know.
Yeah, no, I sometimes feel like I'm flying a kite or something, you know, like I have some, you know, I sort of set up the conditions for things to happen, but so much of what it does in its own way. And yeah, nature is absolutely a collaborator for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was so interested with the blood, with the blue that you were with the dog, you know, and
Rudy.
how, yeah, so sweet. How well, how she felt about that too when she got that blue, you know, and being like his eyes in a way, you know, and that you came up with that, but incorporating blood, which had been incorporated before in history with that same blue.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I don't know, I've gotten to a point where I'm not sure what is sort of happenstance and what is, I don't know, the god of ink is sort of doing its thing, you know, because that, you know, I'd always been really interested in the, ink has often had this sort of like healing quality to it. When you look at old, especially like the Chinese recipes for ink, it's got all this sort of sacred medicine in it, you know, and some of it is edible. And there's a real relationship between this liquid that we use to make marks and something that you put inside your body to make you, to heal you. So I was sort of aware and interested in that history. And then I came upon this very exciting Prussian blue and sort of learned a way of making a beautiful Prussian blue ink. And then when I added this, you know, it wasn't just a dog's blood, it was a kind of blood that's a serum from a dog that's had this same treatment. So you're kind of getting this mixing of the blood in such an interesting way. And then sure enough, Prussian blue, when it first was discovered through an accident involving blood, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm often, I think when you get into really old recipes for kind of anything, you get to this point where it's like, is this science or is this sort of wizardry? You know, and there was a point there where the science people and the wizards were really sort of woven together. You know, like most of the lab glass we use, most of the sort of beginnings of sort of scientific experimentation is wrapped up in what the alchemists were doing. And I think a little bit of that magical, what happens when I put this with that, happens when you just start fiddling rather than going to the art supply store and grabbing yourself some color.
Prussian blue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can go out and buy Prussian blue. You know, there's an easy way.
Yeah, yeah. Do you often then do these colors again, the ink colors, and do they sometimes not? Are they not produced like they came out maybe the first time that you did it, just because of this happenstance that you were describing? Like, have you, you know, oh, I would like to see this color, and then you like, oh, it didn't work, or it's different this time, or?
Well, there will never be again a Rudy Prussian blue. You know, that, you know, there's so much in that ink that's so specific to time and place and people that it's just irreplaceable, you know. And I think that some of the value in what I do is the impossibility of recreating it in a sort of exact way, because it includes, you know, one of my ingredients is the place and time and spirit from which it came. So that piece of the ingredient is a sort of a moving target, you know? So, you know, I do make I love an exacting recipe, and I love trying to get something working just perfectly. And I like to write stuff down, and I believe in the craft of kind of fiddling until you get it just right. But there's always like that one little piece that's sort of inexplicable or unreproducible that acts as some kind of catalyst, you know?
Well, and I think that also goes to when you said your ink goes into the hands of those that then use it. And then it transforms into a whole nother thing, right? When the artists have taken what you have. And then I think especially with Koji, when he was looking at it at first, he's like, this is red, this is not, and then getting to the bottom, and then it is that black that he was wanting, you know? Yeah. I mean, that was amazing to see that, you know, because he was like, well, I don't know about this, you know?
Yeah, no, it was an exciting moment in the film and in our relationship too. Like it was, I was a bit nervous about the whole thing because I was making a lot of like dry pigment-based ink, which is something I hadn't done before. And I was sending it off in huge quantities, and it was all coming from a mine way up in the middle of the woods in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, there were many unknowns to that project. And I really wanted to get it right, you know, and we had a whole sort of film crew waiting to show the results. And yeah, it was a bit, I mean, you got to see the movie to find out what happens. But I mean, it was right. A bit like, it was like, I mean, it still sort of amazes me that, you know, we managed to make a film about ink that's sort of like quite dramatic in a way, you know? The thing that for most people is just this sort of, I don't know, like it's a liquid that lives in your pen. Like it's a pretty seemingly undramatic substance, but it's just got so many stories and so much life in it, and it's ever changing. Yeah, I think the way that film came together has a lot, like, really makes ink into a protagonist of its own, kind of, you know?
Actually, Brian was saying a little bit about that too. And I have to point out the octopus segment of the film, and then the artist who was using your ink to do that beautiful nature of the octopus. Just the underwater, you know, shots of everything and the ink coming out. It's just, you know, then you realize that's an ink that, you know, an animal has made, or, you know, it comes from under the sea. I think a lot of that was saying, and, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I started making ink, my idea was like, oh, I've figured out the black walnut ink and it looks really beautiful, and I have this sort of secret recipe, and I'm going to give it to an elite group of, you know, illustrators and designers, and I'm going to make a business out of that. And really early on in the process, I realized, like, there are people that have been doing this for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and then going back before people that are like creatures that have been doing kind of mark making stuff since, like, going back millions of years, if you take octopi and squid, you know. So I think a huge part of my trajectory around ink is sort of like just taking my hands off the wheel and seeing where it goes. I mean, I just think that it's really in the sharing of the ink, the seeing what other people do with the ink, the seeing what the ink itself has to say, you know, the discovering things like salt and borax and all these kind of amazing natural materials that really are doing some kind of a pretty complicated, cool physics with color. Right. You know, somehow more and more the materials have taken center stage, and I feel like a stage manager a bit, you know, helping them do their best thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I don't know, was there something else? I mean, I think we've covered some, I mean, there's so much more in the film, but is there anything else you'd like to say that maybe I haven't asked you about?
Well, I think, you know, the only other thing that I often try to say in interviews is just that, like, you know, the poster for the film has a big picture of the back of my head and a piece of artwork that I made. And, you know, I've become a sort of the, you know, I do the voiceover where talking about the history of ink and all of that. And, you know, I'm happy to, I love leading that charge because I feel so excited about what ink is and what it can do and how democratic color can be, how it belongs to everyone. But it really is an ensemble cast and crew, and you know, we've got an indigenous woodworker, we've got a amazing ochre worker out in the woods, we've got like just, there are some really heavy hitting, there really are multiple heroes of this thing. And I hope people come away with, like you, with just a sort of feeling of wanting to get out there in nature and sort of do something with your hands. But also I hope that people get that feeling that there's a network out there of people trying to make the relationship between people and nature work in a sort of softer, gentler way. And I think color is like a real key to that softer, gentler way of being in the world, you know? So it's that, I don't know, the group part is important to me. So I
yeah,
you know?
Yeah, and your children too, they've been around it, so it's not unusual.
Yeah, they're part of the
to
Matrix.
them.
Yeah, no, they're part of the color revolution that I'm trying to start.
They're going to forge on.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Jason, so much for your time. I appreciate it, and we all do. And it's a gorgeous film, and I'm really happy that people are going to be seeing it, and that we were able to do this, you know, get an insight from you and from Brian. So appreciate that.
No, it's great questions, and great to talk to you. And yeah, I love San Francisco. Is like one of the best like color foraging places in the world. So I can't think of a better place for this film to meet some of its audience, you know.
Great. Oh, thank you again so much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Bye.